Welcome to How to Steal the Show Every Time You Speak, or in full disclosure, let's say at least increase the likelihood of you being able to steal the show every time. In case we haven't had the pleasure of meeting before, I'm Patricia Fripp, Hall of Fame keynote speaker, executive speech coach, sales presentation skills trainer, and the online training platform Fripp VT, as in Fripp Virtual Training, is mine to help people increase powerful, persuasive presentations. This is one of the best sign-ups and best attended webinars we've ever held. We understand many of you are watching this as a replay. Some of you are live, and we're happy either way. So if you want to put any notes in the chat box, like have you signed up because 1, it's the subject matter, 2, you attend all our webinars, 3, it was the promotion, or 4, it was the subject. Whatever you like, we love to get your comments. And of course, a very important team member in Fripp Virtual Training and also our webinars is Paul. He will now tell you how you can talk to us and bring up the first poll, because we like to know who is live in our events. Take it away, Paul.
Hello, everyone. In the right-hand side of your screen, you'll be able to see a chat window. Within that chat window, you can ask your short, specific questions throughout the call. So if you have any questions or if you'd like to participate in the chat, please put your messages there. And as Patricia said, please let us know why you decided to sign up for this particular webinar. Also, there will be some polling questions throughout the call. I'll post the first one now, and it is asking if you are a professional speaker or corporate presenter. You'll have about a minute. Just click your answer and then click vote, and you'll return to the chat.
And as we say, with professional speakers, you might be a member of the National Speakers Association. You might be a Toastmaster. You might be someone who is part of our various communities who want to speak, or you might be one of my corporate clients or someone who just happened to find the promotion for this event. We are very happy. What we have a tendency to do is relate the content to the percentages of people in the live audience. For every single presentation, whether it is formal or informal, whether your audience is 10, 100, 1,000, online or in person, stealing the show, or shall we say, being very successful and perhaps exceeding your expectations and the expectations of whoever organized the meeting, depends on your relationship with the audience. It is very important you know who is in the audience and have some sort of relationship with them or understanding of the challenges and frustrations. For example, last week, I had the privilege of speaking to a very prestigious law firm, very large one, and I interviewed in advance partners and also, of course, the associates, because they have different levels of experience. They might have different challenges and frustrations around the subject that I was discussing, as well as the individuals who were planning the meeting. Now, if it happens to be your meeting that you are speaking at, and this is a corporate event, it's very important that you communicate exactly what you want to get across. And if you have a theme, and most themes for conferences and meetings, people spend hours coming up with it, it needs to be somehow incorporated in every part of the meeting and every breakout session. So, Paul, what are our numbers?
Well, we have 63% professional speaker and 37% corporate presenter.
All right, well, let's start with the corporate speakers. And certainly for professional speakers, the principles will apply. So first, 1, make a hero of somebody in the audience who might be an unsung hero. For example, one of my clients, I speak every year I help the president of Blue Diamond Almonds. And if you haven't eaten Blue Diamond almonds, I can do a plug. They are delicious and wonderful and plenty of variety. And every year we make heroes of somebody. Now, everyone makes heroes of the salespeople, and I'm not saying stop that because they drive business. However, there are a lot of people that support the salespeople. And I know with Blue Diamond, they had a fire in one of their warehouses, and some guy was up really on the roof with a hose trying to put out the fire until the fire department arrived. I mean, just an unsung hero who didn't think. I was speaking for Simon stores, they manage malls. And one of the heroes they were talking about in their meeting was one little guy in the security department. I mean, really, a minimum wage employee was driving to work and he saw a house on fire and he stopped, raced out, found the hose and started putting the fire out. And when he got to work, he didn't tell his manager what he'd done. The company found out about it after, but he apologized for being late. So anytime you can make heroes of the real people. Now, if you listen to a presidential State of the Union, the presidents always talk about every ordinary citizens. Well, somebody does the research. So even if you don't know them personally, you can find out. Now, if you are a professional speaker, in part of your research, it's good to, for example, talk to whoever the meeting organizer is. Earlier in my career, I was speaking for the Employee Involvement Association. And this was a group, and their whole function was to set up programs and campaigns to have the associates and their employees send in ideas that would make or save the company money. And the chairperson was from Sprint. And I said, do you have any ideas? Anybody that immediately comes to mind? And she said, yes. Nancy Albertson came up with a simple idea that's already made us more than $13 million. I said, can I call her? What's her number? So I called Nancy and I said, just for my records, Nancy, what's your position? She said, I'm just a big gal with big ideas. I'm just a secretary. But do you realize you couldn't write content like that? A big gal with great ideas. And she came up with she told me the idea. And she said, in fact, I'm the only person in the history of Sprint that came up with an idea that made money, which is tougher than saving money. And I got a second award the next year because it kept paying off. And I said, Nancy, well, what'd you get for the award? She said, oh, the 10 people with the best suggestions. We had a fancy event with all the executives. We dressed up. We brought our spouses. They gave us gift certificates and plaques. And I said, Nancy, just between us girls, do you ever fantasize what if they gave you 1%? And she said, Patricia, we do fine. We make enough money. We have a nice life. It's such an honor and a privilege to work for a company that actually cares what we think. So again, when you are telling a story like that, and with that particular group, just interviewing the board of directors, I came up with 4 personal stories from their organizations, and they became classics because the principles of the story work wherever you speak. And notice when you make heroes of individuals like Nancy Albertson, give them the best lines. Many speakers would say from them, it's tougher to come up with ideas that make money than it is to save money. Or if you have programs like this, your employees are likely to be more committed when you reward them and you prove that you listen to them. It's so much better when it comes from the characters. Now, Paul, at this point, are there any questions or comments I should know about?
There were some comments about what drew them to the webinar. Sorry, my mute button was stuck. We have predominantly the subject matter and the title, so essentially one and the same. So the compelling title and the subject matter is what drove people to register for the webinar overall.
Well, good. Well, we hope you will like the title of the next one, which will be the 22nd of March, which we'll tell you about later. Good, perfect. Paul, would you like to bring up the next poll? We want to know, how often do you feel that you are a success? 50% of the time, 75%, or 100%? Now, for our corporate presenters, and again, this is true for every speaker, don't wait too long to put together your presentation. You always start as early as you can and understand the creative process. See, often professional speakers are asked, how often, how long does it take to prepare a speech? Well, that's very different than how long do you think about the presentation before you actually sit down to put it together. If you think of it this way, and Brian Walter, a very creative person in the National Speakers Association, said, you don't write a speech, you develop a speech. And the thought process, you need to keep a way of how you can keep all the titles, keep all the suggestions, all the ideas, all the conversations, all the statistics. The creative process is messy. Your PowerPoint is tidy. So the creative process needs to start on paper, a flip chart, on a whiteboard, however you collect the ideas. And then you put the presentation together once you've got the ingredients, which is built around what is the big idea you're getting across and how do you prove that. Good. The next idea is, it is very difficult to be creative in isolation. It's good to collaborate. This is why I have a lot of corporate clients who have speech writers or communication departments that help them. However, they find helpful working with me, because of 40 years of experience putting together presentations, I throw out ideas and formulas and suggestions and ask questions that trigger the idea of the content. Then they might work with the communication department. What is the logical flow? And then we help them with the scripting. There is help, whether it's formal or informal, whether you work with a speech coach or your own friends or people who are more seasoned than you are. And then if you want to steal the show every time, make sure that your PowerPoint is a visual aid, not a scripting aid. Otherwise, they will be reading it and so will you. Good. And what are our statistics, Paul?
Well, we have, how often do you feel your presentation was a great success? 75% of the time was 65% of the people attending. 100% of the time is 12, and 50% of the time is 23.
Okay, good. Well, and this is just your self-evaluation, and probably if you're saying 75% is probably somewhere between that and 90. And I would like to tell you, I am always a success. And let's be realistic, that is not always true. There is a matter of being professional and delivering on what's expected, and a professional presentation. And then there were times, as my brother Robert Fripp, who is an internationally acclaimed rock and roll guitarist with the band King Crimson, says, it was an honorable performance. And then once in a while, it's as if the angels descend from heaven on the on the silver clouds and blow the golden trumpets in your ear. Sometimes everything comes together. It's the right speaker with the right message, with the right audience. And it's beyond that. Something magical happens. So good. So one, let's remember, collaborate. Difficult to be creative in isolation. Think about your presentation for a while before you sit down and actually put it together. And you cannot start too early, and there is always someone to help. All right, now let's move to professional speakers. Again, these ideas will be helpful for corporate individuals as well. There are 3 audiences to satisfy in many of the meetings we have. 1, it is the person who actually hired you. 2, we want to please the audience. And 3, if there is a corporate sponsor paying for your performance, you need to also satisfy them. One of my most frequently viewed YouTube videos that you might want to look at after, and Paul, perhaps you want to put it in the chat notes, is how to open and close a presentation. And I talk about when I spoke for the American Cemetery Association, and I certainly personalized the message. And I started with what I call my dead mother story. Now, don't worry, my mother had a wonderful life. It was a very happy story. And then I immediately quoted the chairman of the corporate sponsor. And then at the end of the presentation, in a circular technique, I said, at the beginning of the presentation, you heard that my experience when my mother died. Let me conclude with my brother's experience, which he wrote in the liner notes of a CD, Blessing of Tears. And then it was very poignant, and that's what you will see with the music on the YouTube clip. And then, and the last line is, may my living honor my parents. May my living honor my family and friends. May my living repay the debt of my existence. And I say, may my performance honor your profession and my corporate sponsor, and named the sponsor. And it was, and from that, because I personalize it, and here's another technique, internally or externally, in your preparation for a meeting, read the company's newsletters, magazines, perhaps these days they're online. And as you read the articles, you think of your core content. But I look at the articles, and if I am sitting in a meeting listening to executives before me, I always think, what does this remind me of? Because you hear what the executives say that might remind you of content that you have in your repertoire, but you hadn't thought of putting it in this presentation. Now, in your preparation, you're reading their articles. And for that particular group, it was how to get, keep, and deserve your customers. So you have your core content that you're going to deliver for everyone. But then what you want to do is personalize it for the industry or a company. And as I was reading their magazines, I read a story about how a groundsman dropped what he was doing and went over and made an area beautiful because the salesperson was bringing in a family to look at this area. But they took the initiative. Again, an everyday hero, but it reinforced the point that I was making, that everyone is part of the sales department, no matter what their job title is. So, Paul, are there any questions or comments?
There are no questions so far.
All right, good. Well, feel free to write them. So let's look at another area. Is you want to be prepared, and you always have to know exactly how you're going to open and conclude. And I have some clients who say, well, I wait till I get to the event and I find my inspiration from what's going on. And certainly that does happen. But another principle is you cannot trust inspiration. You trust preparation, technique, your structure, and the old showbiz line, which is security is knowing your lines. Certainly something might happen that you can tie into your presentation, but you don't guarantee it. And what I would suggest is that you go with the opening you prepared, a classic opening. And if there are only two parts of your presentation, you know cold, it needs to be the opening and the close. And then insert the personalization after your opening, because that is probably tried, true, and well rehearsed. So be prepared and then be flexible. So, for example, I was speaking at the Ritz-Carlton in San Francisco at the Georgia Banks Association. They were having a conference in San Francisco, and the speaker before me was a professor, and he had written 7 books on leadership and management. And he had a blackboard, as he might, and he made all his notes, and his opening line was, I have written 7 books on leadership and management. However, I have never been in business. And he went through, and then there was a break, and I was coming on after the break. And I said to the hotel staff, yes, take the blackboard off the stage, but keep it right next to the stage so I can see it. And I had my presentation prepared naturally. But when you know your presentation well, you can put it together a slightly different way. So, for example, I came out and after my opening story, I said, you obviously enjoyed Professor such and such. And he said that these were the best ideas from his books, but he's never been in business. I haven't written 7 books on leadership and management, but I have been in business for the last 20 years. So why don't we look at his suggestions as it relates from the point of view of an entrepreneur and see specifically how they might help you? So I used his framework with my content. You know, you certainly get points from being able to think on the spot. Now, if you are somewhat a novice and this is not second nature, you might not want to try the entire framework, but you might take segments. Another time this worked for me, I was speaking at an event in celebration of engineering. And I interviewed the people who were hiring me. I spoke to some engineers, but I didn't quite find what was my real match or connection. And I knew I could give an honorable professional presentation because my key talking points were okayed by the committee who hired me. And again, this organization, large organization, who, of course, were made up of all engineers, they brought in one of their executives. And I picked up the brochure on the table because he said, thank you for the invitation. It's great. You know, engineers are the backbone of our organization. And I have 5 points. So I wrote down all 5 points just on the program on the table. Then it was my turn. I walked up and after my opening, I said, you obviously enjoy your executive such and such remarks. This is what he said. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, it's good enough for your executive. It's good enough for me. And what I did, I tied my content. Now, understand, the content was very similar that I prepared. Because I always think, what does that remind me of? I came up with content, again, that I have internally that I can pull out at a moment's notice. Again, it made it look as if I was coming up with both those presentations on the spot. So show your flexibility. Now, feel free to type in if any of these suggestions are valuable on what you like. Please let us know. If you have any specific questions, I'll happily answer them. Now, the next technique, and this was for a professional speaker, but again, I'm sure you can adapt the principle to a corporate speaker. So, for example, with corporate speakers, it's always good to have your associates, your salespeople, whoever is in your audience, know that you weren't always the wild success you now are, or let them know if you were once in their job. And you, so often as I'm encouraging my clients to tell stories, and I have an approach I call once upon a time technique. I ask all my clients, where were you born? What did your parents do? What advice did they give you that helped develop you to be the person that you are, that's this success? And they often say, Patricia, do people want to hear these stories? And yes, because they will respect your position as national sales manager or president. They will work harder and be committed when they see the person behind the position. And what you might want to do, this works for speakers, we know this more, but as a corporate successful person, tell stories about the principles and the people that made you a success. So as my friend Craig Valentine says, put the principles on a pedestal. And I would also say, put the other people on a pedestal. I have one executive from a biotech company, and they have a practice when someone is promoted, they talk about their storyline. And she, like everybody else, said, Patricia, you know, I hate talking about myself. Well, you don't talk about yourself. You make heroes of the people who helped you get there. So in her case, the first hero was her mother, because when she was 10 years old, her father, in his middle 30s, dropped dead. And her mother had always been a homemaker. And she had 3 children, and they didn't have much money. It was, who expects to die in your at 35 or 6? And her mother said to her, and what makes a story is deliver the dialogue. The mother said, you will never be in this position to have to support yourself and raise a family and not have money. You get an education. You manage your money. And that was the first inspiration that helped her focus on her education, was her mother's encouragement. You always have to be financially secure. Her next hero was a counselor at school, and really helped her find what her talents were and her strengths, and directed her. And then her first boss, who was really a mentor and helped her navigate where she was going to take her career. So you see, you make heroes of other people, then it's very easy talking about yourself. And I can give multiple examples of that, but I won't. You have the principle. Okay, Paul, any questions or comments?
Yes, we have about 4 or 5 now.
Okay.
We have Christina Molinar. how to own a presentation you did not create. This occurs mainly in pharma, which I'm assuming is pharmaceuticals. Key opinion leaders, pharma gives a slide deck and doctors have to make the presentation that they did not create.
Oh, yes, definitely. Well, if you do it, or if you're coaching someone to do it, you need to find a personal connection to the content. So it's a matter of looking at it and again thinking, what does this remind me of? How does it relate to my experience? And at very least, insert a personal story at the beginning. And it could be something like, I'm not sure when you decided to be a physician. For me, I knew at age 6 when my grandmother, so a personal story. And then you might certainly find times of how your patients have used the drugs, or you need to, so you put your own personality into a core message. So I hope that helps. Another?
All right, now we have Jerry. I'm a network marketer who wants to make more impactful presentations. I think that's more of an answer of why he registered. And then we have Newt.
Yes, let me answer, Jerry. So even if he didn't ask it as a question, what network marketers always have to do is, of course, not only sell, but recruit other people for the same opportunity. So what we need to do, and I created for a network marketing client, a formula of how you teach individuals to tell their own personal story. And if Jerry'd like to write this down, it's what you would train people to say about this experience. If you had first met me you would have seen, now what situation? Were you a homemaker? Did you get laid off work? All right. And I was introduced to, at the time I thought, this was what I did first. This is what surprised me most. What I have enjoyed most about it. And then at this point, I found I didn't need a corporate job because the income was. And then if you would be interested in hearing about how you might do this, this is what I can help you do. So it's a matter of, you have to teach a formula that people fill in the blanks. So I hope that helps. Paul, the next one.
All right, then we have Newt. Introduce the personal expression right after your prepared opening statement, are his notes so far. Very good. The personal expression right after that. So far, so good. So that's just the encouragement. And then we have suggestions on how to build flexibility will be very useful.
Good. And with most of my corporate clients, one, we work on a presentation, and then I suggest you have a core presentations or frameworks in your back pocket and stories in your back pocket. So you create content, because there are many times we have opportunities to speak that are unplanned. Oh, Mary, I didn't know you were going to be in our meeting. Can you come up here and give us a 10-minute update on what your division's doing? So you have from the 3rd row or the 8th row to walk up to the front, and you think, what's a good opening? Thank you for the opportunity to update you on our successes. The last time we reported, this was our goal. This is our greatest success. This was our biggest challenge. And now what you're going to do is update on those 3 areas. You've got a structure. So in your back pocket, it could be thank you for the opportunity, or what a privilege to lead the such and such team. Just a way to open and a way to conclude. All right, good. Here's another suggestion that might work. And I learned this early in my career. I was speaking for the California, or was it the California Recreational Vehicle Association? And this was at the heyday of my early speaking career. And one of the other speakers was a mentor and a good friend of mine, very seasoned, George Morrissey. And in his presentation, what he had done, he had gone out as a mystery shopper. He had gone around some of the showrooms and pretended to be a client. And I thought, wow, I can do that. So, for example, be a mystery shopper. I have become, this was earlier in my career when I was mostly a keynote speaker rather than help people with their presentations and speak about speaking and sales. I became an expert in manufactured housing, and this is how I did it. I took a day of my life, and a lot of these companies were near Sacramento, which is less than a 2-hour drive from my house. And I went in and I prepared to be a customer. I pretended to be a customer. And then I wrote down what did they said? What did they do right? What did they do wrong? And this is what you will find. And George found the same. And when I have done this with multiple industries, you go and you pretend to be a potential client. And you say, well, this isn't something I'm doing now, but I'm researching for the future. And very few people ask for your content information. And this is one of the principles that I teach, and that it's not our clients or prospects' job to remember us. It's our obligation and responsibility to make sure they don't have the chance to forget us. So that is an absolutely knockdown drag out. That is great. And for the really best company in that industry, it was funny. I pretended to be a customer. In that case, they'd actually make an appointment. And when I called, they said, oh, are you Patricia Fripp, the motivational speaker? 7 of us came to hear you speak in Sacramento. You were great. Now, I was caught in a little bit of a fib because I had said my parents are coming over to live, and this was suggested to me as an option. And of course, at that point, my parents were not with us anymore. All right, but that client did convert into a lot of business. Now, then what I did, I went in and interviewed the person who ran the factories where they made them, because this was a company that was committed to quality. And I say it's easy to be in quality and when you're at work in the marketing department, but what about, when you're working with a hard hat and orange earplugs? So again, you get to understand an industry. Now, Paul, in case anyone is interested in how would you get more help in all areas of your presentations, and how could we have Fripp as our personal speech coach, we're going to show you, if you'll give us a minute and a half. Now, as you heard, I have an online learning platform called Fripp VT, Fripp Virtual Training. This is highly interactive, learn at your own pace with testing, tracking, monitoring. You can watch it in the way busy people do, in digestible chunks. Now, of course, as fate would have it, Fripp Virtual Training and Lightspeed, the platform's on, is going through an update. But what we're going to do is show you a segment that you can find on YouTube. And we ask you, you can certainly check the Patricia Fripp YouTube channel. So Paul, if you get ready to show us, take it away as you can. And certainly after the maintenance is up, which I would say probably tomorrow, go to frippvt.com and you can take a free trial where you get a chapter on openings, stories, and sales. So Paul?
How often have you sat in an audience and been mesmerized by a speaker? Was it their compelling content, their personality and stage presence? Did they make a deep emotional connection that made you think, wow, the speaker is talking just to me? If we were to flip a coin, how often have you been that speaker? Did you make an indelible connection? Do you make that connection every time you speak? Let's get started on the journey of you becoming a powerful, persuasive presenter. There are a few basics you need to understand before we launch into your next presentation. Remember, the purpose of speaking is to order, clarify, and intensify the experience for the audience. If you occasionally or frequently speak in public to small or large audiences, the question to ask yourself is, am I practicing to improve or to reinforce bad habits? Of course, we're doing both.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Good. So we encourage you to take a trial of Fripp virtual training. This is a very cost-effective way to have Patricia Fripp as your personal speech coach 24/7. And just to put it in context, a year of Fripp VT is less than an hour of personal coaching. And even my corporate clients find if you can do some of the work on your own, the more expensive coaching time is minimized. Good. So take a trial, Fripp VT. And if you have any questions or would want a demo for your company, you can just email pfripp@fripp.com. pfripp@fripp.com. If you're a VT member, thank you. We appreciate your support. Good. Couple other techniques. We are doing our very best to keep the webinars not too long, close to 40 minutes. We certainly will go more if you have questions to ask. But this is a couple of other quick suggestions. One, we know we do mystery shopping. Two, very often you happen, if you're a professional speaker, to speak for companies that you do business with. So, for example, with United Airlines, Wells Fargo Bank, AAA Insurance, I am clients. So in the introduction, we say, Patricia Fripp's a Hall of Fame keynote speaker. That isn't why we hired her. Kiplinger Personal Finance magazine said the 6 best way to invest in yourself is to learn presentation skills from Patricia Fripp. That isn't why we hired her. And you go through this, that isn't why we hired her. And the reason we hired her is because she is frequent flyer number such and such, and will tell us about her experience being a client, or she is policy number this, or she is account number that. And that always makes, again, an indelible connection with the audience. Another way, once you can become a client. For example, with Bartlett Tree Company, I called the San Francisco office and said, I need to have someone come look at my trees. But I warn you, I'm not going to be a very big customer. I only have 2 trees. And Marilyn, who had worked in the San Francisco office for 1 month, said, oh, madam, we don't have any little customers. Everyone is equally important to us. And I wish you could have been there. The day my very own Bartlett tree expert came to call, he called and said, Miss Fripp, I'm going to be 2 minutes late. When he arrived, I said, are you living out your car? He said, no, I'm on my way to my honeymoon, but I wanted to look at your trees first. Now, can you imagine? I started my presentation with that story. And modestly speaking, they forgot the other 3 speakers they'd heard. So that was, once you can grab them and show a personal connection. I spent $198 having my trees personalized. I spent $198 having my trees fertilized, and I personalized the message. And then what happens when they have you back? Well, then I went out and I went to work for them. I went out with the guys on the trucks and they were cutting the leaves and I was raking them and putting them up. And then I went out on sales calls with my Bartlett tree expert. And he said, do I have to tell people who you are? I said, no, I'm just going to walk behind in my hard hat and my yellow t-shirt and a clip pad and I'm going to write down what you say. So with that, we certainly hope some of those suggestions are valuable in how to steal a show. But remember, it's all about preparation. It's about the audience. It's showing the person behind the position. It's reinforcing the theme, and find a personal connection as often as you can. And Paul, are there any specific questions I should answer? Now, I don't know, Paul, if you're having a problem getting in, so let me look at the chat. I can't view.
There we go. Do you think it's important to have a signature talk as they speak to only a few topics?
I would always, if you are a professional speaker, pick what is a subject matter that you genuinely can talk about, or an interest that you're passionate about, and build a core message. Then what I would do is add content to your chunks, different examples. And certainly if you speak to a client and you make some of the suggestions, you interview people, you become a customer, you visit their location, you do something that you can add to your repertoire, and then you look at your speech. So for example, I speak about under the magnifying glass, good to great presentations. And what I vary with that, well, if it's good to great presentations for lawyers, or good to great presentations for engineers, or good to great presentations for managers, or good to great presentations for sales professionals. So what you do, you start with your core expertise and then add the variety depending on the audience. Anything else, Paul?
Yes.
Huh?
Let's see. How do we get a message through to a translator or someone doing sign language? They have a presentation coming where there will be visually and hearing impaired audience.
All right, good. Well, visually impaired is a little different. I have certainly with, if it's going to be sign language, what you do, you talk in advance to the person who are doing that job. And you give people the outline of your framework. So you let people know, you make their job easier, so it'll be easier for the clients. Then when it comes with working with interpreters, and earlier in my career, I made a series called Bulletproof Manager, and this was adapted to be sold in 56 countries. So I learned to de-Americanize my speech, which is always helpful. You can't talk about Baskin-Robbins ice cream or Tom Peters, or you need to make it generic, a famous business author or a chain of ice cream shops. And so then that prepared me for when I went and spoke in Taiwan and I was working with the interpreter. So I asked Harvey McKay and Brian Tracy, friends of mine who have both done it. And one said, well, you have to try all your content around a target audience. So I worked with the team of the client that was bringing me over to make sure all my content worked in their context. Then, and the other said, what you have to do is don't have simultaneous translation. Do it like a dance routine. And I had this amazing young man, Paul. And so you can only do this when you know your content really tight, because you speak for a couple of sentences, they interpret here, interpret here, interpret. Now, when I've done this in American companies that have one company, there was one, they wanted it all in Spanish. Now, there were some people, I had multiple breakouts and some were in Spanish because they said, do you have someone who can do your content in Spanish? I said, no, let me work with the interpreters. So I gave them the framework and I talked to them and how can I serve you better? And they said, we cannot start interpreting the Spanish until we hear a verb. So I let them know what I'm doing. And because my pausing is superb, and I just extended it to give people time to catch up. But it's all in preparation and knowing you are doing this in service for the audience. Another poll?
Absolutely. We have, let me go back down. What can I do to create an effective hook if I have a 30-second segment to promote a product on Kickstarter?
Okay, if you have 30 seconds, then every single word counts. And I would start with how often have you, and then what problem is your product going to solve? And then, so that's how often have you, and then you solve the problem and let them know exactly what you want them to do. And with that, I would say it, have it transcribed, and then edit it down to the nub and go over and over so it's become second nature. But most people who have 30 seconds say, oh, I can't say anything in 30 seconds. Don't waste any of your time. Get to the point, grab them and make a connection.
All right, then we have, how do you feel about interviewing your audience at the start of your talk to make sure your content is focused on their interests?
Well, you do all your interviews ahead of time. You can then schmooze with them at the conference. I met a woman in the ladies' room, Blue Cross Blue Shield tag, and I was putting on my lipstick. So I said, how long have you worked for Blue Cross Blue Shield? She said, 10 years. I said, what's the biggest difference? She said, amount of competition. I said, how much competition? She said, 10 years ago, we had 3 major competitors. Now we have 13. I walked in, and again, after my intro, I said, I just met Mary, and she said 10 years ago, you had 3 major competitors. Now you have 13. Let's roll up our sleeves and look at how you can compete when you have more competition. Now, again, I had interviewed, so I had prepared my presentation for them, but that made it look immediate. But no, you have to do your preparation. Now, what you can do is very much what we do here is segment. You know, you're here for presentations who would consider themselves more corporate or in the professional speaker range. So that is appropriate. I wouldn't actually be interviewing them right then and there. Okay. Paul, another?
All right, can you give us some examples of powerful ways of starting a speech? Is it better to start with a story or inject the story in the middle?
Well, you're going to have stories throughout your presentation. And the story is a good way. However, there are multiple ways. And when you sign up on March the 22nd for your webinar, and remember, it doesn't matter if you can't attend in person. We know 2/3 of our audience is watching this as a replay, but we love having so many people live, and thank you. Then we will go into how to open your presentation with impact, and we will give multiple techniques and multiple opening lines and handouts. So sign up for that for the 22nd of March at noon Pacific. And we'll go into that in detail because I do want honor. So story is good. And one technique is you tell a story at the beginning that sounds complete, but at the end of your presentation, you pick it up and give the end of the story. Any others, Paul?
Well, if you want to touch briefly on it, there was one that said, how do you organize your presentation?
How do I organize the presentation? You come up with the big idea, the central theme, and then your talking points prove your premise. And we will certainly, if you go to YouTube, You can see a sample from Fripp VT on how you structure your presentation, and we will invite you to another webinar on how do you do that. So any other burning questions, Paul?
That is all. There was a few comments of affirmation. The tips are super helpful. Best speaking advice I've ever gotten. Thank you for sharing your valuable information, etc.
Well, good. Well, remember, for anyone who found this valuable, the best of what I have learned in almost 40 years of studying in a very affordable and digestible way is Fripp VT, as in Fripp Virtual Training on Powerful Persuasive Presentations. As of tomorrow, you can get a trial. And if anyone hears the replay of this, if you have any specific questions, please email me at pfripp, my name, pfripp@frippmyname.com. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for your attendance. And we hope to see you on March the 22nd. And remember Fripp. However, much more important than remembering me, remember what my name stands for. Frequently reinforce ideas that are productive and profitable.